need to make sure that we're doing that, but then in whatever way we can, teach our children to by having them join in. They'll remember it so much better, and it will become a part of them so much better than just telling them just platitudes. It's not going to really amount to much. Okay. Now, I do want to look at one other passage. There's a lot more to go over, but I'm not going to keep you here a very long time. And this is an excerpt from Psalm 78. I encourage you to turn there, and we will be looking at this part. But we're going to start at Psalm 78, verse 1. So again, this is one of those watershed texts about family discipleship, and this is one of those texts that really focuses on fathers doing their part. Of course, mothers are very important, and in other parts of this series, I would talk about how moms and dads work together to accomplish this. But the scriptures really do call on fathers to take a leadership role in this as much as they can. Now, obviously, if dad really can't get home from work or really can't do this or that or whatever, well, then mom really does need to step up. And she helps in all kinds of ways anyway. But fathers, if at all possible, should be leading these times of family discipleship, family worship. So Psalm 78, verse 1. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord, and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God, and not forget the works of God, but keep his commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. So this psalm has been variously entitled, The Story That Needs Passing On. Another entitles it, So the Next Generation Will Know. And I was talking to one of you in this room who was saying, a little while ago, I was just thinking about this church for myself and my wife, and then, okay, yes, for my children. But now that I've been here a bunch of years and the grandchild is here now I'm thinking so much more generationally. And as I think about the good of this church, I don't want to, I'm not just doing it for myself now, but I'm laboring here in this church and want good in this church for my children and my grandchildren. And that's one of the things I loved about how you look at your church, an intergenerational church. That sure, we have some things for kids and some things for men and some things for women. Sure, there are some uses for that. But we also value that we all love one another and we're not just separated. We want to do life together. So now a deposit of truth has been given to his generation from their fathers or even their ancestors, and now they're to pass it on to the next generation. And this is not just a passing on of the explicit commands of the Bible. That's important. We need to pass on the 10 Commandments and all the other kinds of commands that God wants us to pass on. But it also has to do with retelling of the glory of God and what he has done, telling the stories of the Bible. I don't say stories in the way of make-believe, of course, the accounts of the Bible, and showing how God was working through it all, and how he helped his people in time of need, and how he strengthened them to do great things. So passing on these kind of powerful imageries to our children. and their fathers are to pass this information on. It emphasizes the point that parents are crucial in their children's discipleship, but men, just like we always need to be, we often need like a 2x4 to just hit over our head. That's you, sir. Get to work. Okay? We men sometimes need to be pulled up a little bit and told, remember, you are very important in this process. You need to be active in this. Even if your wife is a super dynamo who will just do everything if you continue to sit in your easy chair and keep doing this. Don't. Get off your easy chair and don't be a workaholic as much as you can hold that back. I realize that sometimes we have to put in a giant number of hours. But if you can pull yourself away from work and away from your entertainment enough to do a great job with your kids, a great job where you're really in their lives. And so God tells fathers. Okay. Now, when I think about all these verses, fathers, and passing it on to the generation to come, I think about kind of a contemporary application of this. In Psalm 78, 1 through 8, there's a positive and a negative. The positive, pass on what God has done and His praises and His strength and His wonderful works. Yes, we need to pass on that positive vision of what God has done. That's very important. But then we also need to focus on the part where they fought wickedness and there was a lot of enemy advancement on them and what they did at that point. And it's really important that we try to we need to prepare our kids for this culture. It's so important not just to teach the stories of the Bible, but then and the commands, but then to shine that light on what's being taught in our schools, what's being taught in this culture. So things like evolution and the whole thing of God creating things and things not being by accident, but all things being made by God and all things owing their allegiance to God. The whole LGBTQ indoctrination. We need to, sadly, at an early age, let kids know what's going on. To say that God has created sex in a wonderful way. God has created relationships in a wonderful way. But do you see how it has been perverted? Do you see, son or daughter, what have you heard certain things in school? What have you heard outside of the classroom? What are you hearing? Let's talk about this. Let's see what kind of this world system and the media are pushing. Let's see, and why do you think they're doing that? And just have talks about that. And the more and more I think of it, I mean, the younger and younger it needs to be that we're having talks about the birds and the bees with our kids very early. I can't tell you how early. You have to figure that out, but I think it needs to start kind of early where you're giving them little bits. But I would never want to send my kids to middle school without exposing them to a lot. Letting them know what is true and what is going to be taught and what this culture is teaching. Now, you have to figure out how much you would say at each age, but don't be naive. Don't be naive. Don't say, 20 or 30 years ago, I didn't even know about this stuff till like 9th grade. Come on now. This is a very aggressive culture. Your children are going to learn one way or the other. They're going to learn from their kids. They're going to learn from perhaps an overly aggressive sex education program in the school. They're going to learn from the computer. You be very careful with the computer, obviously, but they are going to learn one way or the other. You need to get out in front of that. You know, like if you were a politician and you know that some bad news is going to come, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to put out your information before the bad information gets out and makes you look bad. Well, in the same way, get the information out before they hear a perverted story of it. And may God give you wisdom when, but don't kid yourself. To see the godless tendencies of socialism and communism, materialism, false religions, but then also those that are masquerading as Christianity. We need to spend time teaching our kids these things because there are so many kids who go through churches, even pretty good churches, but they have no clue the difference in denominations and teachings. And so is it any wonder that we might have a kid go through here, let's say, but then, well, we tell them perhaps you should get married to a Christian. But what if they get married to a Christian, but that person's going to such a liberal church, we wouldn't even want to call it a Christian church. Or maybe it's such a partially cultic kind of place. We need to teach kids very well, and it takes a while. It takes a whole curriculum, as it were. And I would encourage you to get stuff from maybe like Summit Ministries or some other organization out there that is made for dealing with worldview, dealing with all of the isms out there and what the Bible has to say about them. Because our kids are going to fall and be duped by all kinds of things unless we inoculate them, unless we prepare them and let them see, and then pray a lot, because even then, sometimes it will be very difficult dominions to conquer. But we need to get ahead of it, or all kinds of bad ideas are going to come to our kids, and because we have not prepared them, they may very well fall. Now, let me get back to fathers again. Notice here, our fathers have told us. And then later on, which he commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children. Now, I know I've already kind of mentioned this somewhat, but fathers are especially charged to teach the Bible to their children. And again, that does not mean mothers have nothing to do with it, of course. They are going to have a big part in that as well. And especially if they're staying home with the kids, they have a whole lot more time with that. But fathers, when they're home, they need to, again, stay away from the screen if they can. Stay away from just saying, I'm just too tired. No, when you get in the driveway, you say, I'm on to my next job, and it's even more important than the one I just left. I am there to be a leader in my home for good, and I'm going to make sure I have some very quality time with my kids before I go veg out in whatever way. Now, there are some other passages that really focus on fathers. In Malachi 2, God decries the rampant divorce of Malachi's day and says that the goal of godly offspring is being put in jeopardy when men commit treachery against their wives by divorcing them. But a little more specifically, at the end of Malachi, repentance will involve fathers turning their hearts again to their children and children to their fathers. And then let me tell you a little story about a Sunday school missionary. When we think Sunday school, we usually mean, the hour before worship, or however a church might do it, okay? And that's great. But back in 1780 in England, before there were child labor laws and compulsory education laws, there were all kinds of poor kids working 6 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day. Very ignorant, and they got 1 day off a week. It was the Lord's Day, Sunday. And a great many of them weren't going to church. They were just going around making a lot of trouble in England, especially in London, in around 1780, I'm sure before and after that. Well, there was a guy named Robert Rakes. And no, he didn't have a lawn business. But Robert Rakes said, we need to do something about these kids. We need to introduce Christ to them, but then they don't know it. They can't even read the Bible. We need to teach them how to read, how to write, and do a little bit of arithmetic. We need to give them just the basics in just learning the basics, the 3 R's. And we need to introduce Christ to them. So they would make these Sunday schools that were many, many hours, okay? And it was good for them, and it was good for the climate of London. I mean, you just didn't have these kids running around crazy anymore. Well, that got very famous in England, and then the idea came over to the United States. And there were many who were called Sunday school missionaries. They were just going around from town to town setting up Sunday schools. Okay? Now, one of the guys was Stephen Paxson. I think he set up several thousand Sunday schools. And he would go around from town to town and farm to farm and all and try to get interest in the school. Now, he once went to a hog farmer. And he said, well, sir, I'm setting up a Sunday school. How many children do you have? And the guy said, not sure. Let me count. A wife, let's count them all. Name them off and I'll count. And it took them a while. And they figured out they had 13 kids. Now, then Stephen Paxson said, well, how many hogs do you have? He said, 83. 83 fine hogs. And Stephen Paxson said, well, what is your mind on? Your hogs or your kids? And he said, you got me there. It's more on my hogs than on my kids. And so again, are any of us in here so focused on our work that we have not enough time for our kids? And may God give us wisdom, because some of us are probably just working. We'd love to be home, but we're just inundated. I'm not trying to put any kind of guilt trip on you, not at all. But is your heart toward your kids more or your work more? Where is your heart? That's the main thing. And that man, 2 years later, was converted. And he actually went to Sunday school with his kids because he didn't know how to read as well. And perhaps you've seen statistics that show that if a father is active in a home spiritually and active in taking his kids to church, there is such a much higher rate of those kids staying with church and staying with Christ. And you know, how you mix that in with God's providence and all, I don't know. But it really does point out the importance of men being spiritual leaders in their homes. A few more verses. Joshua 24:15. Joshua says that as the father and husband of the home, he declares that while he cannot control others' homes, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Genesis 18:19. God says of Abraham that I have chosen Abraham that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Job, right at the beginning of Job, we see Job as the priest of his home. And he would regularly conduct worship with his children present, consecrating them and offering sacrifices for them. And then finally, Ephesians 6. And if I get more chance to talk about it, I definitely would want to talk about Ephesians 6, which again is one of those watershed issues about watershed passages about the role of fathers training their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And why are fathers mentioned? Again, I think that fathers as leaders of their home will be ultimately responsible for how they led their families on Judgment Day, because the buck stops with them. and may they work well with their wives, because of course it's a wonderful relationship. It's a wonderful symbiotic relationship there that's very needed. Well, that's all I have to share. And I can't remember, Pastor Mike, there was something else that was hooked with this evening. Was it just fellowship or?
Yeah, just a time afterwards for you to, sit and hang out still.